My name is Eleanor, and on my 68th birthday, my son Daniel looked me in the eyes and told me I had become nothing but a burden to his family. I sat there at the dining table he'd reluctantly set for my birthday dinner, the words hanging in the air between us while his wife Amanda avoided eye contact, and my grandchildren stared at their plates. What Daniel didn't know was that for the past 15 years, I had been silently paying for everything from his mortgage to my grandchildren's college funds. And now, as I packed my belongings into cardboard boxes labeled Mom's Things, I was about to teach my son the most difficult lesson of his adult life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The decision to move out wasn't impulsive. For months, I had watched the growing resentment in Daniel's eyes when I needed a ride to my doctor's appointments. I noticed how Amanda sighed when I asked for help reading the fine print on my medication bottles. The whispered conversations. That stopped when I entered a room. The slow, systematic erasure of my presence in their lives, until I felt like a ghost haunting the corners of their beautiful suburban home. "Mom, we need to talk about assisted living," Daniel had said one evening, his voice carrying that practiced patience he reserved for discussions about my future. "It would be better for everyone. Professional care, people your own age." What he meant was, better for him. Better for his image as the successful financial advisor with the perfect family. Better for his schedule that never seemed to have room for an aging mother with deteriorating eyesight who moved too slowly through the grocery store. I had sacrificed everything for Daniel after his father died. When Robert passed away 20 years ago, leaving nothing but debt and painful memories, I had rebuilt our lives from scratch. I worked 3 jobs until my knees ached every night, just so Daniel could finish college without loans. I postponed retirement to help with the down payment on his first house. I never remarried, focusing instead on helping him build the life that he now didn't want me to be part of. The breaking point came on that birthday evening. I had spent the afternoon baking my own cake, a small lemon sponge with buttercream frosting, Daniel's childhood favorite that he no longer seemed to remember. The dinner was rushed, my gifts perfunctory. Bath salts from Amanda, a generic greeting card signed by my grandchildren Emma and Liam with no personal messages. As I cut my cake, Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, this isn't working anymore," he said, his BlackBerry buzzing with work messages he seemed eager to answer. "You need more care than we can provide. Your forgetfulness, your health issues, you've become a burden on this family." A burden. The word sliced through me. In that moment, the decision that had been forming in my mind for months crystallized into certainty. "I understand," I said quietly, putting down my fork. "I'll make arrangements." The surprise on his face was almost comical. He had expected resistance, tears, emotional manipulation, all the things he had convinced himself I was capable of. My calm acceptance confused him. What followed was 2 weeks of controlled preparation. I contacted my lawyer, Michael Abernathy, who had helped me manage my affairs since Robert's death. I called my sister Catherine in Arizona, who had been begging me to move closer to her for years. I began the meticulous process of untangling my financial support from Daniel's life, support he had never known existed. You see, when Robert died, he left an insurance policy that Daniel never knew about. It wasn't much initially, but combined with my savings and some surprisingly successful investments Michael helped me make over the years, it had grown into a considerable sum. Enough to quietly help Daniel when his business struggled during the recession. Enough to anonymously supplement my grandchildren's college funds. Enough to make the occasional bonus appear in their accounts when vacations were being planned or unexpected expenses arose. Daniel believed his success was entirely self-made. He attributed his lucky breaks to his hard work and business acumen. The mysterious client who had provided the capital for his office expansion during the market downturn? That was me. working through Michael's careful arrangements. The unexpected scholarship that appeared for Emma's private school tuition? My doing? The timely refinancing offer on their mortgage with terms too good to pass up? Michael had connections at the bank. For 15 years, I had been the invisible safety net beneath my son's life. Not because I wanted gratitude, but because that's what mothers do. They protect their children, even from the consequences of their own arrogance. Now, as I carefully sorted through my belongings in the small bedroom they had reluctantly given me when my apartment building was sold 3 years ago, I felt a strange sense of peace. The photo albums went into one box, clothing into another. My few pieces of jewelry, including Robert's wedding band that I had kept on a chain around my neck, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. "Grandma, are you really leaving?" Liam asked from the doorway, my 12-year-old grandson shifting uncomfortably as he watched me pack. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to live near Aunt Catherine. You'll like Arizona when you come visit. There's a pool. Dad says you're moving to a retirement community," he said, his young face scrunched in confusion. I smiled, folding another sweater. "Not exactly. I bought a house. You'll see it soon." The bewilderment on his face mirrored what I anticipated seeing on Daniel's when the financial reality of my absence began to materialize. When the mortgage payment came due without the mysterious supplement that had kept it manageable all these years. When Emma's college tuition statement arrived without the anonymous scholarship fund covering half the cost. When the property taxes on their beautiful home, taxes I had been quietly paying, suddenly became their sole responsibility. Sometimes the only way to make someone understand your value is to remove it entirely. A difficult lesson, but perhaps the most important one I could teach my son at this point in his life. Tomorrow, Michael would arrive with the moving truck. Tomorrow, I would hand Daniel an envelope containing a letter explaining everything, and nothing at all. Tomorrow, my new life would begin, and so would his education about what it truly meant to be a burden. My life before Daniel's harsh judgment hadn't always been one of invisibility. There was a time when I was the center of his world, when my voice reading bedtime stories was the last thing he wanted to hear before sleep, when my cooking was praised rather than critiqued, when my presence was a comfort rather than an inconvenience. Robert and I had raised Daniel in a modest 3-bedroom ranch house in Millfield, a middle-class neighborhood where children played in unfenced yards and neighbors borrowed cups of sugar without hesitation. Robert taught high school science and coached the baseball team. I worked as an administrative assistant at the local hospital. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Daniel never went without necessities, though he sometimes had to wait for luxuries. When Daniel was 14, Robert developed the first symptoms of the illness that would eventually take him. Tremors in his hands that he attributed to too much coffee, fatigue that he blamed on long hours. By the time the diagnosis came, early-onset Parkinson's complicated by a rare degenerative condition, Daniel was preparing for college, and Robert was no longer able to work. The medical bills mounted quickly. Our insurance covered only portions of the specialized treatments. I took on evening shifts at the hospital and weekend work transcribing medical records from home. The savings we had put aside for Daniel's education dwindled, then disappeared entirely. Robert insisted we not tell Daniel the extent of our financial troubles. "He needs to focus on his future," Robert had said, his voice already beginning to slur slightly from the progression of his disease. "Promise me you'll make sure he gets through college, Ellie. Promise me." I had promised. And I had kept that promise, even after Robert died during Daniel's sophomore year at State. I sold our house and moved into a small apartment to pay for his remaining tuition. I told him it was because the house held too many memories, which wasn't entirely untrue. The grief was still raw when Daniel graduated, but I stood proud at the ceremony, knowing Robert would have been proud too. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daniel's early career had been promising. He secured an entry-level position at a financial services firm in the city, met and married Amanda, and they purchased their first home, a starter house they quickly outgrew when Emma arrived, followed by Liam 2 years later. I continued, working at the hospital, adding shifts and declining promotions that would have required further education I couldn't afford. My life revolved around work and weekend visits to Daniel's growing family. The insurance money came unexpectedly. Robert had maintained a policy I hadn't known about, with a delayed payout structure that finally matured 10 years after his death. Michael Abernathy, who had handled Robert's modest estate, contacted me about the distribution. "It's not a fortune, Eleanor," he explained. "But invested properly, it could provide significant security for your retirement." It was the first financial breathing room I'd experienced in decades. My immediate thought was to help Daniel with the down payment on the larger house he and Amanda had been eyeing in Lakewood Hills, an upscale neighborhood with excellent schools. But when I mentioned the insurance payout to Daniel, his reaction surprised me. "That's great, Mom," he said, already distracted by his ringing phone. "You should enjoy it. Take a cruise or something." There was no acknowledgement of the years of sacrifice. No recognition of how I might have used that money for myself earlier if it had been available. In that moment, I glimpsed something in my son that concerned me. Not malice, but a casual disregard for the financial realities that had shaped our lives. So I made a decision. Rather than announcing my help, I would provide it quietly, working through Michael's professional channels. When Daniel mentioned struggles with the down payment, an unexpected bonus appeared at his firm. When Amanda worried about the higher property taxes, a tax relief program mysteriously accepted their application. Small adjustments, carefully orchestrated, that made their lifestyle attainable without undermining Daniel's pride or sense of accomplishment. Years passed this way, with my invisible support allowing their lives to flourish while my own remained modest. I continued working well past when I should have retired, my eyesight gradually deteriorating from years of detailed paperwork, my knees growing weaker from the hospital's hard floors. I finally retired at 65, relying on Social Security, my small pension, and careful management of Robert's insurance money, much of which had been channeled into Daniel's family's needs. When my apartment building was sold for redevelopment 3 years ago, the timing coincided with a downturn in Daniel's business. Reluctantly, I now realize how reluctant he truly was, he offered me the small guest room on the first floor of their spacious Lakewood Hills home. "Just until you find a new place, Mom," he had said. But we both knew my fixed income severely, limited my housing options in our increasingly expensive area. Life in Daniel's home had its own rhythm, one that increasingly excluded me. Family dinners became rarer as Daniel worked later, Amanda joined charity committees, and the children pursued extracurricular activities. I tried to contribute by cooking occasionally and helping with household chores, though Amanda often redid the cleaning to her exacting standards after I finished. I attended Liam's baseball games and Emma's dance recitals, sitting alone while Daniel and Amanda socialized with the other Lakewood Hills parents. Gradually, I became less a family member and more an obligation, a presence to be managed rather than embraced. The conversations stopped when I entered rooms. My opinions on everything from politics to dinner options were politely acknowledged, then ignored. My occasional forgetfulness, misplacing my reading glasses or repeating a story, was met with exaggerated patience that thinly veiled growing irritation. Through it all, I continued my silent financial support. When Emma needed braces not fully covered by insurance, the orthodontist mysteriously offered a professional courtesy discount. When Liam wanted to attend an expensive baseball camp, a merit scholarship appeared. When their water heater failed unexpectedly, a rebate program conveniently processed their application with unusual speed. None of these interventions were extravagant enough to raise suspicions, and Michael managed the transactions with professional discretion. I wasn't supporting their entire lifestyle. Daniel was successful in his own right. But I was smoothing the rough edges, absorbing the unexpected costs, making their upper-middle-class life just a bit more comfortable than it would have been otherwise. And so we continued, my presence in their home growing more tenuous as my financial support remained steadfast but invisible. Until that birthday dinner when Daniel finally spoke the word that had been in his eyes for months: burden. The morning after my birthday, I woke early, my mind clear despite the weight of Daniel's words. The house was quiet. Daniel and Amanda wouldn't be up for another hour, and the children never stirred before being called repeatedly for school. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen island, watching the sunrise through the large bay windows that overlooked their meticulously landscaped backyard. This kitchen, like the rest of their home, spoke of careful curation, high-end appliances selected more for appearance than functionality, expensive granite countertops that Amanda fretted over when anyone used them without a cutting board, custom cabinetry that had required 3 separate contractors before she was satisfied. It was beautiful, but somehow cold, like a showroom rather than a home. I pulled my cell phone from my robe pocket and dialed Catherine's number. My sister answered on the second ring, her voice still raspy with sleep. 3 hours earlier in Arizona, I'd forgotten. "Ellie? Is everything all right?" "I'm sorry to call so early," I said, "but I've made a decision. That offer to move near you? Is it still open?" The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Catherine had been urging me to consider a move to Arizona for years, especially after her husband Phil had passed. She had space in her comfortable Scottsdale home, a vibrant community of active seniors nearby, and most importantly, a genuine desire for my company. "Of course it's still open," she finally replied, fully awake now. "What happened?" I hesitated, reluctant to speak the words aloud. "Daniel thinks it's time I consider other living arrangements." "He said that? On your birthday?" The indignation in her voice was both comforting and embarrassing. I'd always protected Daniel in family conversations, minimizing his shortcomings, emphasizing his accomplishments. "It's for the best," I said, sidestepping the full truth. "I should have done this years ago." "I've been telling you that since Robert died," Catherine said softly. "You've given that boy everything. Everything, Ellie." "Not everything," I corrected. "Her. Just what he needed." After finishing the call with plans for Catherine to come help with the move in 2 weeks, I sat at the kitchen island contemplating my next steps. The methodical part of my mind, the part that had managed household budgets through the leanest years, that had stretched every dollar during Robert's illness, began formulating a plan. I would need to contact Michael. The financial arrangements would require careful unwinding if Daniel was to understand the lesson without facing true hardship. I wanted him to recognize what I had provided, not punish him or his family for his thoughtlessness. As I was contemplating this, Amanda appeared in the doorway, already dressed for her Pilates class in expensive athleisure wear, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. "Oh," she said, startled to find me there. "Good morning, Eleanor." She had never called me mom, or even mother-in-law, always keeping that formal distance between us despite 20 years of family holidays and shared milestones. "Good morning, Amanda," I replied, watching as she moved efficiently around the kitchen, preparing her green smoothie with practiced movements. "About last night?" she began, not quite meeting my eyes as she measured protein powder. "Daniel didn't mean to upset you. He's just concerned about your well-being." "There's no need to explain," I said calmly. "In fact, I agree with him." The measuring spoon paused mid-air as she looked at me with surprise. "You do?" "Yes. I've decided to move to Arizona. My sister Catherine has been asking me to join her there for years." Amanda's relief was almost comical in its transparency. "Oh, well that would be wonderful for you, wouldn't it? All that sunshine. And Catherine must be lonely since Phil passed." "Yes, I think it will be good for both of us," I agreed. I'll start making arrangements today. I should be able to be out in 2 weeks if that's acceptable. 2 weeks? Amanda seemed momentarily flustered by the timeline. Of course, take whatever time you need. This is your home too. The platitude fell flat between us, contradicting everything that had been said and unsaid the night before. After Amanda left for her class, I called Michael's office and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. His secretary, knowing me, well, after 20 years of professional association, heard something in my voice that prompted concern. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Collins?" she asked. "Everything is changing, Margaret," I replied. "But yes, in the end, I think things will be all right." When Daniel came down for breakfast, already engrossed in emails on his phone, I informed him of my decision with the same calm certainty I had shared with Amanda. His reaction was more complicated. Relief, certainly, but also confusion at my ready acquiescence and perhaps a flicker of guilt quickly suppressed. "Arizona is pretty far, Mom," he said, his tone suggesting he was the one being reasonable. "Are you sure you don't want to look at those retirement communities we discussed? The one in Cherry Hill has an excellent reputation." "I'm sure," I said, firmly. "Catherine and I have talked about this for years. It's time." "Well, if that's what you want," he said, already turning back to his phone as if the matter were settled. Later that morning, I took a taxi to Michael Abernathy's downtown office, the familiar brick building with its brass fixtures and wood-paneled. Elevator spoke of stability and tradition, qualities I had always valued and tried to instill in Daniel. Michael had aged well in the 20 years I'd known him, his dark hair now silver at the temples, lines of experience around his eyes adding to his distinguished appearance rather than detracting from it. He rose from behind his desk when his secretary showed me in, coming around to greet me with genuine warmth. "Eleanor, it's good to see you," he said, taking my hand in both of his. "Though I'm concerned about the urgency of your call. What's happening?" I settled into the comfortable leather chair across from his desk and began explaining my situation and the decision I had reached. To his credit, Michael listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. "So you want to untangle the financial support without causing immediate hardship," he summarized when I finished. "And you want them to understand the extent of your contributions without feeling—" He searched for the right word. "Without feeling charity," I supplied. "I don't want to humiliate Daniel. I just want him to understand." Michael nodded, pulling up my file on his computer. The timing is actually fortuitous in some ways. Several of the arrangements were structured with 5-year terms that are coming up for renewal soon. The mortgage supplement, Emma's education fund. We can allow those to lapse naturally rather than terminating them abruptly. "And the house in Scottsdale?" I asked. Catherine had mentioned a property for sale in her neighborhood months ago, and I had asked Michael to look into it, more as a someday dream than an immediate plan. "The owners accepted another offer," Michael said, "but there's a similar property 2 streets over that just came on the market. Slightly smaller, but with a pool and guest casita. I can have the realtor send the listing if you're interested." "I am," I said decisively. "Very interested." As Michael and I spent the next 2 hours reviewing my finances and making arrangements, a strange sense of liberation began to grow within me. For decades, my financial decisions had been filtered through the lens of Daniel's needs, real and perceived. Now, for the first time since Robert's diagnosis, I was planning solely for myself. The woman who left Michael's office that afternoon walked with a straighter back and a clearer purpose than the one who had entered. The inciting incident, Daniel's cruel words, had set in motion not just a change of address, but a fundamental shift in how I saw myself and my relationship with my son. The invisible support system I had maintained for so long would soon become visible by its absence, and in that revelation lay both apprehension and, surprisingly, hope. The 2 weeks that followed my birthday dinner took on a dreamlike quality. The mechanics of my departure occupied my days, sorting through belongings, arranging shipments, coordinating with Catherine and Michael, while my nights were filled with reflection, memories surfacing like treasures long buried beneath the sand. I had expected resistance from Daniel once the reality of my leaving sank in, perhaps even an attempt to persuade me to stay. Instead, he seemed to grow more distant, as if emotionally preparing for my absence by beginning it prematurely. Our interactions became increasingly transactional, discussions about mail forwarding and what furniture I would take, questions about the few household tasks he'd need to assume. Amanda, on the other hand, displayed a curious mix of efficiency and awkwardness. She helped organize donation bags for items I wouldn't keep, offered to arrange a cleaning service after I left, and even suggested freshening up my room with new paint once it was empty. Her helpfulness thinly veiled her eagerness to reclaim the space. "We could make it a proper home office for Daniel," she mentioned casually as we sorted through the linen closet. "He's been working from the kitchen island for too long." "That would be lovely," I replied, noting how she spoke as if I had already gone while I stood beside her folding towels. My grandchildren's reactions revealed the most about the family dynamics I'd been too close to fully perceive. Emma, 15, and increasingly absorbed in her social circle, seemed barely to register the change. When I mentioned my departure at dinner, she glanced up briefly from her phone. "Cool. Can I have friends over for a pool party when Grandma Catherine sends pictures of her new house?" Liam, however, was different. At 12, he existed in that precious space between childhood and adolescence, old enough to understand what was happening but young enough to express his feelings without the filters his parents and sister had developed. "Why do you have to go so far away?" he asked, helping me pack books into boxes one afternoon after school. "Dad says it's because you want to be with Aunt Catherine, but you always said family should stay together." The genuine confusion in his eyes pierced me. This child, who had my Robert's thoughtful gaze and questioning nature, saw the contradiction that the adults were carefully talking around. "Sometimes, Liam, people need different things at different times," I explained, carefully wrapping my old copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that I'd read to Daniel when he was not much younger than Liam. "Right now, your dad and mom need space to focus on their lives and careers, and I need to be somewhere I can feel useful again." "But you are useful," he protested. "You help me with my history homework. You remember all the appointments Mom forgets?" I smiled, touched by his innocent assessment. "There are different kinds of useful, sweetheart. In Arizona, I'll be close to Catherine, who could use my company since Uncle Phil died, and I'll have my own home again. With a pool," he added, brightening slightly. "With a pool," I confirmed, "which you and Emma can visit." The mechanics of dismantling my financial support system progressed in parallel with my physical preparations. Michael arranged a series of meetings to review each aspect of the plan. We sat in his office one afternoon, examining the automated contribution to Emma's college fund. "We've contributed $37,000 so far," Michael noted, reviewing the statement. "The fund currently has a value of approximately $4,300 with market growth. That would cover roughly her first year and a half at a state university, less if she chooses a private college." "And Daniel has been contributing as well?" I asked. Michael's expression was carefully neutral. "Nominally. Small birthday deposits. Primarily. The bulk has come from the trust we established. What happens if we stop contributions now? The existing funds remain intact and continue to grow based on market performance," Michael explained. "But without continued contributions, it will fall significantly short of covering her full education expenses." We made similar calculations for each aspect of my support. The mortgage supplement that had kept their payments $630 lower each month than they would otherwise be. The property tax arrangement that had absorbed nearly $4,200 annually. The home insurance policy I had quietly maintained as a rider on my own coverage. In total, Michael summarized, Your direct financial support to Daniel's family amounts to approximately $29,000 annually, not including occasional emergency assistance or gifts. The figure startled me. I knew each individual arrangement, but seeing the total impact quantified made me momentarily question my decision. Could they manage without this support? Was I being cruel? Eleanor, Michael said gently, reading my expression, this is not insignificant, but it's also not catastrophic. Daniel's annual income should be sufficient to absorb these costs, though it will require adjustment to their spending habits. He doesn't even know to expect them, I murmured. Which is why we're implementing the graduated approach, Michael reminded me. The mortgage supplement will continue for 3 more months, giving them time to adjust. The property tax arrangement phases out at the end of the quarter. Emma's college fund remains intact, just without new contributions. I nodded, grateful for his methodical approach. This wasn't about punishment, it was about truth. As the days passed, I became increasingly aware of the invisible threads that had connected my life to Daniel's. Threads I was now carefully, deliberately severing. Each one represented a choice I had made out of love, but also out of a misguided belief that protection from consequences was a mother's duty, even when her child was a grown man with children of his own. The most difficult realization came one evening as I searched for my reading glasses, eventually finding them in Daniel's home office where I'd left them after helping Liam with homework. A leather portfolio lay open on the desk, containing financial projections for the coming year. I hadn't meant to look, but a notation caught my eye. Mom, assisted living costs, followed by a figure that made my breath catch. Daniel had been researching facilities and calculating how to afford them, not out of concern for my well-being, but as a budgetary consideration. And the amount he'd allocated was far less than what quality care would require, suggesting he expected me to contribute substantially from my limited resources. I replaced my glasses on my nose and studied the figures more carefully. There was no acknowledgement of how I might feel about such arrangements, no consideration of my preferences or dignity. I was a line item in his financial planning, a burden to be managed at minimum expense. In that moment, standing in his carefully appointed home office with its framed credentials and family photos from which I was largely absent, I understood with complete clarity that my decision to leave was not just right, but necessary, for both of us. Daniel needed to see me as a whole person, not an obligation or a resource, and that clarity could only come through my absence. I closed the portfolio and returned it exactly as I'd found it, then walked quietly back to my room. That night, I wrote 2 letters. The first was to Michael, confirming our arrangements and adding a new instruction. I wanted a detailed accounting prepared for Daniel, not immediately, but 3 months after my departure, when the first financial implications would begin to surface. The second letter was to Daniel himself, to be given to him on the day of my departure. This one I wrote and rewrote several times, struggling to find words that would convey understanding rather than accusation, love rather than resentment. Dawn was breaking when I finally sealed it in an envelope, addressed simply, "For Daniel, when I'm gone." The rising awareness of what I had enabled and what I was about to change settled into a calm certainty. The path forward was clear, if not easy. Like all important journeys, it would require leaving something behind to discover what lay ahead. The day before my scheduled departure dawned with unexpected clarity, both in the weather and in my mind. Catherine was arriving that afternoon to help with the final arrangements and to drive with me to Arizona the following day. The moving company had already collected the larger items I was taking: my bedroom furniture, Robert's old reading chair, the small writing desk where I'd paid bills and written letters throughout my adult life. What remained were the personal items too precious to entrust to strangers: photo albums, Robert's watch, the hand-knitted Afghan my mother had made before Emma was born. These would travel with Catherine and me in her SUV. along with enough clothing to see me through until the moving truck arrived at my new home. I made coffee in the kitchen, savoring the quiet routine one last time. Daniel and Amanda's coffee maker was a complicated European machine with multiple settings and specialized pods. I had never quite mastered its operation. My own simple drip coffee maker had already been packed, so I used the French press that sat largely unused on their counter. The familiar process, boiling water, measuring grounds, the gentle press of the plunger, centered me for what was to come. With coffee in hand, I settled at the kitchen island and opened my notebook. The list of final tasks was short. Confirm. The mail forwarding, leave the house keys on the counter, meet with Emma and Liam after school for a private goodbye, place the letter for Daniel where he would find it after I had gone. The brevity of the list after weeks of preparation felt anticlimactic, yet significant. The small details that would complete my transition from resident to memory. A text from Michael confirmed our final arrangements. The escrow on the Arizona. House would close tomorrow. Perfect timing for my arrival. The paperwork for the transitional financial support was complete. The letter detailing my years of assistance was drafted, to be sent to Daniel in 3 months' time. All the mechanisms were in place for the lesson I hoped would reshape our relationship rather than end it. Amanda appeared, dressed for her morning run, and faltered slightly at the sight of me. "Oh, Eleanor, you're up early." "Last-minute details," I explained, gesturing to my notebook. "Would you like coffee? I just made a fresh press." "No, thank you. I'll grab something at the juice bar after my run." She fidgeted with her smartwatch, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional weight of the moment. "So, Catherine arrives today?" "Yes, around 3. She'll stay at the hotel near the airport tonight, and we'll leave first thing tomorrow." Amanda nodded, still not quite meeting my eyes. "I'll make sure the guest room is ready for your final night. Fresh towels and everything." The absurdity of her offering to prepare my room as if I were a visitor did not escape me. But I simply thanked her. Amanda had never been skilled at navigating emotional situations. Her discomfort was palpable. "Amanda," I said gently as she turned to leave, "I want you to know I understand." She froze, her back to me, shoulders tense. "Understand what?" "How difficult it's been having me here. How it changed the dynamic of your home. I don't hold any resentment about that." She turned slowly, her expression a complex mixture of relief and shame. "Eleanor, I never meant to make you feel—" I raised a hand, stopping her. "You don't need to explain. Family is complicated. We all do our best with the situations we're given." For a moment, I thought she might actually engage, might allow a genuine exchange on our last day together. Instead, she glanced at her watch again. "I should get going before it gets too hot. See you this evening?" And she was gone. The French, doors closing behind her as she jogged down the garden path. It struck me that this brief, awkward conversation might be the most honest exchange we'd had in years. I spent the morning going through my remaining belongings one final time, ensuring nothing important was left behind. In the process, I found items I had forgotten. A clay handprint Liam had made in kindergarten, a Mother's Day card from Emma with a carefully drawn portrait of me from when she was 8, a photo of Daniel at his college graduation with his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride. These mementos of happier times gave me pause. Had I constructed an entirely false narrative about my place in this family? No. The evidence of my current reality was too clear, too consistent. But these artifacts reminded me that our story wasn't uniformly negative. There had been genuine love and connection, moments of real appreciation amidst the growing distance. Perhaps those moments could form the foundation for whatever new relationship might emerge from the coming changes. At 1 o'clock, I called a taxi to take me to the school. I had arranged with the administration to see Emma and Liam briefly before the end of the day, a private goodbye away from their parents' watchful eyes. The school secretary, who knew me from years of picking up sick grandchildren and attending school functions, greeted me with unexpected warmth. "We'll miss seeing you, Mrs. Collins," she said, leading me to the small conference room where the children would meet me. "The kids told us you're moving to Arizona." "Yes, to be near my sister," I confirmed. "A new chapter." "Well, good for you," she said sincerely. "It's never too late for a fresh start." Emma arrived first, her teenage nonchalance briefly set aside as she entered the room and saw me waiting. For just a moment, I glimpsed the little girl who used to climb into my lap for stories, before the teenager reasserted herself. "Hey, Grandma," she said, dropping her backpack on a chair. "Mom said you wanted to see us before you leave tomorrow." "I wanted a chance to say goodbye properly," I explained. "Just us." Liam burst in then, less concerned with appearances, and threw his arms around my waist. "I don't want you to go," he said into my sweater. I held him close, meeting Emma's eyes. Over his head. She looked away, but not before I caught the shine of tears she was fighting to control. "I have something for each of you," I said, once Liam had composed himself. From my purse, I removed 2 small wrapped packages. "Just a remembrance." Emma opened hers first, a delicate silver locket that had belonged to my mother. Inside, I had placed a tiny photo of the 4 of us, Emma, Liam, Daniel, and me, from happier times. "It's antique," I explained as she examined it. "Your great-grandmother's." For a moment, the significance seemed to register with her. "Thank you," she said quietly, immediately fastening it around her neck. Liam unwrapped his gift with less restraint, his grandfather's pocket watch, carefully restored. "This was Grandpa Robert's," I told him. "He would have wanted you to have it." "But I never even met him," Liam said, turning the watch over in his hands with surprising care. "No, but you remind me of him every day," I replied. "The way you think about things, the questions you ask. He would have loved knowing you." We spent 30 precious minutes together, talking about Arizona and promises to visit, about school and friends and the small details of their lives that I would miss witnessing daily. When it was time for them to return to class, I hugged them, both fiercely. "Remember," I told them, "wherever I am always your grandmother. That never changes." Emma, finally releasing her careful control, gave me a real hug, the kind I hadn't received from her in years. "I'll call you," she whispered. "For real, not just because Mom tells me to." As they left, I remained seated in the conference room, gathering myself before the taxi ride home. This goodbye, unlike the awkward morning exchange with Amanda, felt complete. A proper closure with the promise of continuation in a new form. It strengthened my resolve for what was to come. My commitment to this course of action was no longer just about teaching Daniel a lesson or asserting my own worth. It was about creating space for more authentic relationships with all of them, freed from the constraints of resentment and obligation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is to remove yourself from toxic patterns, allowing everyone the opportunity to grow into better versions of themselves. With renewed purpose, I gathered my purse and left the school, ready for the final phase of my departure and whatever lay beyond it. Catherine arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, her silver SUV pulling into the driveway with the punctuality that had defined her throughout our lives. Where I had always been the accommodating sister, bending to fit the needs of those around me, Catherine had maintained firmer boundaries. Perhaps that's why she had seemed harsh to Daniel over the years. She saw what I enabled long before I was ready to acknowledge it. She stepped out of the car looking remarkably unchanged from my last visit to Arizona 2 years earlier. At 65, 3 years my junior, Catherine had embraced her silver hair and laugh lines with the same straightforwardness she applied to everything in life. She wrapped me in a hug that smelled of the same perfume she'd worn since college. "You look exhausted," were her first words. Typical Catherine. Direct, unvarnished truth. "It's been an intense few weeks," I admitted as we walked toward the house. "Has he even tried to talk you out of leaving?" she asked, her voice dropping as we approached the front door. "Not really," I said. "I think he's convinced himself this is what I want, so he doesn't have to feel guilty." Catherine's expression tightened, but she said nothing as we entered the house. I was grateful for her restraint. Criticism of Daniel would only make this transition more difficult. Amanda arrived, home early, clearly having adjusted her schedule to be present for Catherine's arrival. The two had never been close, their fundamentally different approaches to life creating a polite but unbridgeable distance. "Catherine, how lovely to see you," Amanda said, embracing my sister with the practiced warmth she reserved for social obligations. "How was your flight?" "Direct and on time, thankfully," Catherine replied. "The car rental place tried to upgrade me to something ridiculous, but I insisted on something that would fit Eleanor's things." The conversation continued in this vein, superficial pleasantries covering the undercurrent of tension. I watched them, struck by how much energy we all expended maintaining these facades. Would my departure ultimately free all of us from these exhausting performances? The first test of my resolve came that evening when Daniel returned home. He greeted Catherine warmly enough. They had always maintained a cordial if somewhat distant relationship, but there was a brittleness to his demeanor that signaled discomfort. Over dinner, Catherine spoke enthusiastically about Scottsdale and the house I was purchasing, 2 streets from her own. "It's a perfect size for you, Ellie," she said. 2 bedrooms plus the casita for when the grandkids visit, a manageable garden, and the community has walking paths and a recreation center." "You're buying a house?" Daniel interrupted, fork paused midway to his mouth. "I thought you were moving in with Catherine." The surprise in his voice revealed the first crack in his narrative. He hadn't bothered to ask about the details of my plans, assuming I would simply shift from being his burden to becoming Catherine's. "Yes," I replied calmly. "The escrow closes tomorrow. Perfect timing, really." "But," he began, then stopped himself. "That's great, Mom. I didn't realize you were in a position to purchase property right now." The implication was clear. He believed my finances were far more limited than they actually were. I had never discussed money with Daniel beyond the basics. He knew I had a pension and Social Security, but the insurance money and my investments had remained private, managed through Michael. "Eleanor has always been an excellent saver," Catherine interjected smoothly. "Remember how she managed to put you through college on a hospital administrator's salary?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Catherine's direct gaze. "Right, of course." A brief, awkward silence followed before Amanda deftly steered the conversation toward safer topics. The desert climate, the best seasons to visit Arizona, the proximity of good medical facilities for when you might need them. Later, as Catherine and I sat on the patio enjoying a final glass of wine, she addressed what we had both observed. "He has no idea, does he? About any of it. The money, the support, what you've sacrificed?" "No," I admitted. "And he won't. Not right away. Michael will explain everything when the time is right. And if he never fully understands, if he just adjusts to the new financial reality without recognizing what you did all these years?" I watched the moonlight reflect off the swimming pool Daniel had insisted on installing despite the significant expense, an expense partially offset by my unexpected inheritance that year. "Then that will be his loss," I said finally. "I can't control how he responds, only what truths I choose to reveal." Catherine nodded slowly. "You've changed, Ellie. I wasn't sure you'd go through with this." "Neither was I admitted. But some lessons can only be taught through absence." The morning of our departure presented the next challenge, the practical and emotional complexity of actually leaving. Daniel had arranged to go into work late, making a show of being present for my departure without having to engage too deeply with the emotions it might evoke. The mood at breakfast was strained, with Daniel checking his phone constantly while Amanda fluttered around the kitchen, offering more coffee and pastries neither Catherine nor I wanted. The children were subdued, Emma stealing glances at me when she thought I wasn't looking, Liam openly morose. "What time are you planning to hit the road?" Daniel asked, his tone suggesting a casual interest that his tense posture belied. 9:30, Catherine answered. "We want to make it to Flagstaff before dark." Daniel nodded. "Smart. The desert highways can be dangerous at night." These mundane exchanges continued, everyone carefully avoiding the elephant in the room, that after today, for the first time in Daniel's adult life, I would not be readily available. No more last-minute babysitting requests. No more holiday dinners prepared primarily by me despite being hosted in their home. No more convenient safety net just a phone call away. At 9 o'clock, with Catherine's SUV packed and nothing left but goodbyes, I faced perhaps the greatest test of my resolve. Standing in the front entryway, surrounded by the family I had centered my life around for decades, I felt a momentary wave of doubt. Was I making a terrible mistake? Would this irreparably damage relationships already strained? Emma surprised me by stepping forward first, the silver locket I'd given her visible at her throat. "Call when you get there, okay?" she said, hugging me with unexpected fierceness. "I put my number on speed dial on your phone." "I will," I promised, holding her perhaps a moment longer than she expected. Liam was next, still struggling with tears he considered too childish for a 12-year-old boy. "I'm going to ask Dad to bring us for Christmas," he whispered. "Don't say anything, but I already started researching flights." "That would be wonderful," I told him, knowing the decision would ultimately rest with Daniel and Amanda, not with Liam's heartfelt planning. Amanda's goodbye was predictably correct. A warm hug, well wishes for the journey, promises to send photos of the children's activities. "We'll set up regular video calls," she assured me. "The children shouldn't lose touch with their grandmother." Finally, Daniel stood before me, seemingly at a loss. In this moment of genuine emotion, the polished financial advisor disappeared, and I glimpsed the boy who had once clung to my hand on the first day of kindergarten, terrified to let go. "Mom," he began, then faltered. "I know this is what you want, but if it doesn't work out? If Arizona isn't what you expected?" "I know," I said, saving him from having to explicitly offer what he hoped would never be needed, a way back. "This is the right choice, Daniel, for all of us." We embraced, and I felt the slight tremor in his shoulders that betrayed emotions he wouldn't express. When we separated, he quickly composed himself, the professional mask sliding back into place. "Safe. Travels. Text when you stop for the night." As Catherine and I walked to the car, I felt the weight of their gazes on my back. I paused at the passenger door, turning to take one last look at the house that had been my reluctant home for 3 years, and the family now standing awkwardly in its doorway. "I love you all," I said simply, loud enough to carry across the driveway. "That will never change." Then I got into Catherine's SUV, closed the door, and looked straight ahead as we pulled away. The most difficult test had been passed. I had left without allowing sentiment to weaken my purpose or guilt to change my course. As we turned onto the main road, Catherine glanced at me. "You okay?" I took a deep breath, feeling something shift. Inside me, the burden of unspoken truths beginning to lighten with each mile that separated me from the life I had outgrown. "I will be," I answered honestly. "I think we all will be, eventually." The journey to Arizona unfolded like a gradual decompression. With each state line we crossed, the tension in my shoulders eased incrementally. Catherine, always perceptive, kept conversation light during the first few hours, allowing me the space to process the magnitude of what I'd done. We spent the night in a modest hotel in Flagstaff, arriving just as the sun was setting behind the San Francisco peaks. After checking in, I remembered Daniel's request and sent a brief text. Arrived safely in Flagstaff, continuing to Scottsdale tomorrow. All is well. The response came almost immediately. Glad to hear it. Drive safe tomorrow. Polite, perfunctory, relieved. Over dinner at a nearby restaurant, Catherine finally broached the subject we'd been dancing around all day. So, what exactly did Michael arrange regarding Daniel's finances? She asked, cutting into her steak with precision. I twirled pasta around, my fork, considering how to explain the intricate web of support I had created and was now dismantling. It's complicated, I began. The mortgage supplement ends in 3 months. The property tax arrangement phases out at the end of the quarter. Emma's college fund remains intact but won't receive new contributions. Catherine raised an eyebrow. And how much is all that worth annually? About $29,000, I said, the figure still startling when spoken aloud. Catherine's fork clattered against her plate. 29? Ellie, that's more than your entire pension. I know, I said quietly. It accumulated gradually, over the years. A little help here, a small adjustment there. Michael managed it all through various trusts and accounts. And Daniel never questioned where this money came from? Catherine's incredulity was tinged with anger on my behalf. He attributed it to his own success, I explained. Good investment returns, fortuitous timing, professional connections. People tend to rationalize good fortune in ways that flatter their own abilities. Catherine shook her head slowly. When will he find out the truth? Michael will send a complete accounting in 3 months, once the first financial adjustments begin to impact their household. A detailed letter explaining everything I've done over the years, with supporting documentation. Why wait? Catherine asked, why not tell him yourself before leaving? I considered this question carefully, sipping my water before answering. Because right now, he would dismiss it as emotional manipulation. An aging mother trying to make her son feel guilty. He needs to experience the reality first, to feel the absence of support he never acknowledged receiving. Catherine studied me with newfound respect. That's surprisingly strategic of you, Ellie. I've always thought you were too soft with him. Perhaps I was, I admitted. But this isn't about punishment. It's about education. The next morning, we continued our journey south to Scottsdale. The landscape transformed gradually from pine forests to desert vistas, the saguaro cacti standing like sentinels welcoming us to my new beginning. We arrived at the title company shortly after noon, where Michael had arranged for the closing documents to be ready for my signature. The process was surprisingly straightforward. Initials here, signatures there, and suddenly I was a homeowner. Again, for the first time since selling the family house after Robert's death. The keys felt significant in my palm, solid and real, a tangible symbol of my independence. The house itself exceeded my expectations. Situated in a quiet cul-de-sac of similar southwestern-style homes, its stucco exterior and warm terracotta welcomed us as Catherine pulled into the driveway. The front yard featured carefully planned xeriscaping, desert plants requiring minimal water but providing color and texture throughout the seasons. The previous owners did a complete renovation last year, the real estate agent explained as she gave us a tour. New HVAC, updated kitchen, solar panels on the roof to keep utility costs manageable. I walked through each room slowly, envisioning my furniture in the spaces, imagining morning coffee on the covered patio overlooking the small but pristine pool. The casita, essentially a detached guest suite with its own bathroom, stood beyond the pool, perfect for when Emma and Liam might visit. "What do you think?" Catherine asked when the agent stepped outside to take a call. "It feels right," I said simply, like it was waiting for me. That evening, settled temporarily in Catherine's guest room until my furniture arrived, I checked my phone to find messages from both grandchildren. Emma had sent a photo of herself wearing the locket, with a simple text, "Miss you already." Liam's message was longer, detailing his day at school and asking questions about the new house. Nothing from Daniel or Amanda, but I hadn't expected anything so soon. As I prepared for bed, Catherine appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of herbal tea. "You should know," she said, settling into the armchair by the window. "This won't be easy." "The physical move is just the beginning." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I suspected I understood. "The real challenge comes next," she continued. "When Daniel starts experiencing the financial impact of your absence. When the comfortable buffer he's always had begins to disappear. When he realizes that his perfect life requires adjustments he's not prepared to make." I nodded slowly, accepting the cup she offered. "I've thought about that. He might be angry. He might feel betrayed." "He almost certainly will," Catherine confirmed, "and not just at the financial implications, at the fact that you kept this from him all these years, that you watched him take credit for successes that were partially your doing." "I never wanted credit," I said softly. "I just wanted him to be secure, to have opportunities." "I know that," Catherine replied, "but Daniel may not see it that way, at least not immediately. Are you prepared for him to be truly angry with you, perhaps for the first time in his adult life?" The question hung between us, and I found myself confronting the most significant challenge yet. Not the logistics of moving or the financial implications, but the potential damage to my relationship with my son. I had convinced myself that this revelation would ultimately strengthen our bond, forcing honesty where pretense had prevailed. But Catherine's question compelled me to acknowledge the risk that it might instead create a rift too wide to bridge. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "I want to believe that once he understands everything, he'll recognize it was all done out of love. But I can't control how he'll react." Catherine reached across and squeezed my hand. "That's the most honest thing you've said since I picked you up yesterday. You can't control his reaction. You can only control your response to it." We sat in companionable silence, sipping our tea as the desert night deepened outside. The enormity of what lay ahead settled over me, not just establishing a new life here in Arizona, but navigating the aftermath of truths long concealed. The major challenge I was approaching wasn't just about Daniel learning to live without my financial support. It was about whether our relationship could survive complete honesty after decades of carefully maintained illusions. It was about whether the love between mother and son was strong enough to withstand the dismantling of comfortable fictions we had both, in different ways, relied upon. As Catherine said goodnight and left me to my thoughts, I found myself mentally rehearsing conversations that might never happen, preparing defenses for accusations not yet made. The real test would come not tomorrow or the next day, but 3 months from now, when Michael's letter arrived on Daniel's desk and the carefully constructed reality he had accepted without question began to unravel. Fell asleep that night with mixed emotions, pride in my newfound courage, excitement about my fresh start, but also a deep, persistent worry about the bridges I might have irreparably burned in pursuit of truth. 3 months passed with surprising swiftness. My new life in Scottsdale took shape around me. Furniture arranged in my house, routines established, friendships forming with neighbors and members of Catherine's book club. I planted desert wildflowers in clay pots for the patio and joined a water aerobics class at the community center. Small pleasures that had been absent from my life in Daniel's home gradually returned. The luxury of reading late into the night without worrying about disturbing others. Preparing meals according to my own preferences, spending money on occasional indulgences without justifying the expense. Contact with Daniel's family settled into a predictable pattern. Emma called sporadically, usually when something significant happened at school or when she wanted to share teenage drama that she didn't feel comfortable discussing with Amanda. Liam was more consistent, texting several times a week and insisting on video calls every Sunday to show me his latest baseball trophies or science projects. Amanda sent occasional group texts with photos of family activities, always perfectly, composed and captioned with relentless positivity. Daniel himself remained distant. Our communications were brief and practical. A question about where I had stored the family's holiday decorations, information about a letter that had arrived, at their address for me, a perfunctory birthday message. Nothing substantial, nothing emotional. It was as if he had placed our relationship in a holding pattern, unwilling to invest more until he determined whether my move was truly permanent. I marked the date on my calendar when Michael would send the letter, exactly 3 months after my departure, as we had arranged. That morning, I woke with a sense of impending change, knowing that somewhere in Chicago, an envelope was being delivered that would irrevocably alter my relationship with my son. The package Michael sent was comprehensive, not just a letter, but a bound portfolio documenting 15 years of financial assistance. Bank statements, trust documents, property tax records, education fund contributions, all meticulously organized and annotated with explanations of how each mechanism had functioned to support Daniel's family. The final page contained a summary of the total support provided over the years and a projection of how Daniel's household expenses would change now that these supports were being withdrawn. Michael had drafted the cover letter with characteristic professionalism, explaining that the information was being provided at my request, not to induce guilt, but to ensure transparency. He emphasized that the support had been given freely, out of love and concern, and that its discontinuation was not punitive, but a natural consequence of my changed circumstances. I waited all day for some reaction from Daniel, checking my phone obsessively for texts or calls. By evening, when no communication had come, I found myself alternately relieved and concerned. Had the package not been delivered? Had he received it but not yet opened it? Or was he so shocked by its contents that he needed time to process before responding? The answer came the following morning at 7:15 when my phone rang with Daniel's number on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, Daniel. Is it true?" His voice was tight, controlled, but with an undercurrent of something volatile. "Everything in Michael's letter? Is it all true?" "Yes," I said simply, seeing no benefit in evasion. "Every word." A pause, then. "I need to see you. Not over the phone." "I understand," I replied. "When would you like to come to Arizona?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm at the Scottsdale Plaza Resort. I flew in last night. Can we meet somewhere neutral?" The knowledge that he had received the package, processed its contents, booked a flight, and arrived in Arizona all without my awareness was jarring. This calculated approach was so typical of Daniel. Emotions contained, actions decisive, control maintained. "There's a cafe near my house called Sunrise Bistro," I suggested. "Quiet, not too busy on weekdays." "Fine. 10 o'clock?" His tone left no room for negotiation. "I'll be there," I confirmed, and the line went dead. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing an outfit that made me feel confident yet approachable. Tailored linen pants, a blue blouse that Catherine said brought out my eyes, comfortable, but stylish sandals. I applied makeup lightly and wore the simple pearl earrings Robert had given me on our 20th anniversary. Armor of a sort, though I knew the coming confrontation would penetrate any external defenses. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, selecting a table in the back corner where our conversation would not be easily overheard. I ordered tea for myself and remembered to request a black coffee for Daniel. Some maternal habits remained ingrained despite everything. He arrived precisely at 10, looking simultaneously familiar and strange. He wore business casual clothing, a khakis and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, but his face showed signs of strain I hadn't seen before. Had the financial adjustments of the past 3 months already taken such a toll, or was it the shock of yesterday's revelations? Daniel sat down across from me, ignoring the coffee I had ordered for him. 15 years, he said without preamble. 15 years of intervention in my finances, without my knowledge or consent. I nodded, allowing him to establish the parameters of our conversation. The mortgage supplements, Emma's college fund, property taxes. He enumerated each item as if building a legal case. Even Liam's baseball camp scholarships, all you. Yes, I confirmed, keeping my voice even. Why? The question emerged sharp, almost accusatory. Why would you do all this secretly? Why let me believe these were business successes, lucky breaks, professional connections? I took a sip of tea, gathering my thoughts before responding. Would you have accepted direct help from me? He shifted uncomfortably. That's not the point. It's exactly the point, Daniel. From the moment you started at the firm, you were determined to prove yourself, to show everyone you had succeeded on your own merits. You rejected even small offers of assistance. Remember when I offered to help with Emma's preschool tuition and you told me you had it covered? A flicker of recognition crossed his face, but his expression remained guarded. So you went behind my back instead? Created this shadow support system? Do you have any idea how this makes me feel? Discovering that what I thought were my achievements were actually my mother's charity? The word charity stung, but I pressed on. Not charity, Daniel. Family. And they were your achievements. The money simply removed some obstacles, created some opportunities. What you did with those opportunities was entirely your own doing. Shook his head, frustration evident. You don't get it. You undermined my independence, my agency. You made me think I was standing on my own when actually you were holding me up the whole time. Would you rather I had let you struggle? I asked. Watched you take a second mortgage to afford Emma's braces? Seen you defer maintenance on your home until small problems became big ones? Allowed Liam to miss opportunities because of financial constraints? Yes, he exclaimed, loudly enough that a few nearby patrons glanced our way. He lowered his voice, with visible effort. Yes, because those would have been my struggles, my choices, my responsibilities. Not decisions made for me by someone who didn't trust me to handle my own life. The accusation hung between us, revealing the heart of his anger, not the financial support itself, but what he perceived as a fundamental lack of faith in his capabilities. It wasn't about trust, Daniel, I said softly. It was about love, about wanting to give you and your family the best possible chances. Maybe that was wrong of me. Maybe I should have been more transparent. But every decision I made came from wanting to see you thrive. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture, so reminiscent of his father that it momentarily took my breath away. And the irony, he said bitterly, is that now that all this hidden support is gone, we're facing serious financial adjustments. Amanda's furious. She thinks I've been mismanaging our money all along. I'm sorry for that, I said genuinely. The timing of the withdrawal wasn't meant to cause maximum disruption. It was about giving me the chance to establish my new life. While watching mine fall apart, he challenged. Your life isn't falling apart, Daniel. You're facing adjustments, yes, but you have a good income, a beautiful home, a healthy family. What you're experiencing now is the reality that most people live with all the time. Making choices, setting priorities, occasionally doing without. He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. When did you become so hard? The question cut deeper than he could know. I'm not hard, Daniel. I'm honest. For perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, completely honest. And honesty feels harsh when it follows years of comfortable illusions. We sat in strained silence for several minutes, the remnants of our confrontation hanging in the air between us. Daniel stared at his untouched coffee, now growing cold. I watched his face, trying to read the complex emotions playing across features. I had known since the moment of his birth. I need to process this, he finally said, his voice calmer but hollow. All of it. I understand, I replied, resisting the urge to reach across the table and take his hand as I would have done in the past. This new honesty between us required space, room for both of us to adjust to its implications. Are you staying in Scottsdale? Long? I asked, trying to gauge his intentions. I fly back tomorrow afternoon. I told Amanda it was an emergency client meeting. He gave a humorless laugh. I guess I'm not the only one keeping financial secrets in the family. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I chose not to comment on it. Would you like to see the house before you go? Meet Catherine properly? He hesitated, then shook his head. Not this trip. I need to get back. There are some financial matters I need to address immediately. The unspoken implication hung between us, financial matters that had suddenly become urgent because of the withdrawal of my support. We parted with an awkward half-hug in the cafe parking lot, neither of us quite knowing how to physically express the altered state of our relationship. As I watched him drive away in his rental car, I felt an overwhelming mixture of relief and apprehension. The confrontation I had been anticipating for months had finally occurred, but its outcome remained uncertain. Catherine was waiting at my house, trying to appear casual, though I knew she had been anxious about the meeting. How did it go? She asked as I sank into my favorite armchair. About as well as could be expected, I replied. He's angry, confused, possibly humiliated. But he listened. That's something. Did he thank you at all? Catherine's protective instincts were evident in her tone. I shook my head. That would be expecting too much right now. He needs time to recalibrate his understanding of the past 15 years. And his financial situation? Did he say anything about how they're managing? He mentioned serious financial adjustments. Amanda is apparently upset, believing he's mismanaged their money. I sighed, feeling a twinge of regret for the strain this would place on Daniel's marriage. I never wanted to create problems between them. You didn't, Catherine said firmly. Their lifestyle created the problem. Living beyond their means and counting on invisible support that they never acknowledged or appreciated. I knew she was right, yet the maternal instinct to shield my child from pain, even deserved pain, remained strong. I just hope they find their way through this without too much damage. The days following Daniel's visit brought a strange, suspended feeling. I continued my new routines, morning walks, afternoon swimming, evenings with books or television programs I actually wanted to watch. But part of my mind remained fixed on Chicago, wondering how Daniel was navigating the aftermath of our meeting. A week passed with no communication from him. Liam texted as usual, mentioning that Dad seems stressed about work stuff, but otherwise giving no indication that anything had changed in the household. Emma was uncharacteristically quiet, not responding to my messages for several days. Then, 10 days after our confrontation, a text arrived from Amanda. Need to discuss summer plans for the children. Can you talk tomorrow? The message was brief but significant. The first direct communication from Amanda since my departure that wasn't a generic family update. I responded immediately, suggesting a time that would work with her schedule. Our phone conversation the next day was revealing. Amanda's voice had lost some of its practiced polish, replaced by a tense efficiency. We're making some changes to our summer arrangements, she began without preamble. The children's usual camps are not going to work out this year. I see, I said, understanding the unspoken financial constraints behind this decision. Emma is quite upset about missing theater camp, Amanda continued, and Liam was counting on baseball training. Daniel suggested that perhaps they could spend part of the summer with you instead. The request, for it was a request, despite being framed as a suggestion, took me by surprise. After our confrontation, I had expected Daniel to distance his children from me, not propose an extended visit. I would love to have them, I said carefully. But shouldn't we discuss this with Daniel directly? Amanda's hesitation was brief but noticeable. Daniel is adjusting to some professional changes at the moment. It would be helpful if this was one less thing for him to manage. Professional changes. A euphemism, I suspected, for financial restructuring necessitated by the withdrawal of my support. Was Daniel downsizing his office space? Reducing staff? The possibilities concerned me, but I knew better than to ask Amanda directly. Of course, I agreed. The children are always welcome here. I have the casita ready for them, and the community has excellent recreational facilities. The relief in Amanda's voice was palpable. That would be wonderful. Perhaps 3 weeks in July? We'd cover their airfare, of course. I almost laughed at the absurdity of her final statement. Their insistence on maintaining appearances of financial stability, even while asking for what amounted to free childcare to replace the summer camps they could no longer afford. But I simply confirmed the dates and ended the call with promises to make arrangements for activities the children would enjoy. Catherine was skeptical when I told her about the conversation. They're using you as a convenient cost-saving measure, she observed. Not exactly a heartfelt reconciliation. I know, I acknowledged. But it's a beginning, and I get 3 weeks with Emma and Liam, which is more than I expected this summer. Just be careful, she warned. Don't slip back into the same patterns, solving their problems, subsidizing their lifestyle. Her concern was valid. The temptation to ease Daniel's financial transition by offering direct help was strong. It would be so easy to call Michael and arrange for a one-time assistance to help them through this adjustment period. But I knew that would undermine everything I had tried to accomplish with my departure and revelations. Instead, I channeled my energy into preparing for the grandchildren's visit. I purchased swim passes for the community pool, researched local activities that wouldn't strain my budget, and began transforming the casita into a space that would appeal to both a 15-year-old girl and a 12-year-old boy. No small challenge. 2 weeks after my conversation with Amanda, an unexpected email arrived from Daniel. The subject line was simply, "Financial planning," and I opened it with trepidation, unsure what to expect. The message was brief and surprisingly professional. Mom, I've been reviewing our family finances in detail and have realized several areas where my planning has been inadequate. I want to thank you for the stability you provided over the years, even if I disagree with the method. I'm working with a financial advisor, not myself, to create a sustainable budget that reflects our actual income. This is challenging but necessary work. Daniel. No mention of our confrontation. No emotional language. But between the lines, I read a begrudging acknowledgement of reality and perhaps the first step toward acceptance. The fact that he had sought outside financial guidance rather than trying to solve everything himself represented significant growth for my fiercely independent son. I composed a careful reply. I'm glad to hear you're getting professional guidance. This transition period will be challenging, but I have complete confidence in your ability to adjust and thrive. Let me know if talking would be helpful. Love, Mom. Then I saved the email exchange to a special folder I had created labeled New Beginnings. Whether this represented the start of honest communication or merely a pragmatic adjustment to new financial realities remained to be seen, but it was movement in a direction that felt hopeful. The immediate aftermath of our confrontation had not brought the emotional catharsis I had perhaps secretly hoped for, but it had initiated a process of reckoning and realignment that was necessary for any authentic relationship to develop. Like a bone that must be broken and reset to heal properly, our relationship was in a painful but potentially transformative phase. July arrived with Arizona's characteristic heat, the temperature climbing well above 100 degrees by mid-morning. I had adjusted to the desert climate better than expected, learning to schedule outdoor activities for early morning or after sunset, and appreciating the dry heat that felt less oppressive than Chicago's humid summers. Emma and Liam were scheduled to arrive on the first Tuesday of the month. I spent the day before their arrival stocking the refrigerator with their favorite foods, ensuring the Wi-Fi was working properly in the casita, and making final touches to their sleeping arrangements. The nervous energy I felt reminded me of preparing for their visits when they were much younger. The same desire to create perfect memories, the same worry about potential disappointments. Catherine stopped by that evening, bringing homemade cookies for the children and practical advice for me. "Remember, they're not coming for a vacation at a resort," she cautioned. "Don't exhaust yourself trying to entertain them every minute, and don't spend money you need for yourself." "I won't," I promised, though we both knew my tendency to overextend myself where the grandchildren were concerned. The flight from Chicago was scheduled to land at 11:20 a.m. I arrived at the airport early, waiting anxiously at the designated meeting point for unaccompanied minors. When they finally emerged, escorted by an airline employee, I was struck by how much older they seemed in the 4 months since I'd seen them in person. Emma had changed her hair, cutting her once-long blonde locks into a stylish bob with pink highlights at the ends. Liam had grown at least 2 inches and carried himself with new confidence. They spotted me and reactions diverged. Liam rushed forward for a hug while Emma approached more casually, offering a small smile and a one-armed embrace. The first complication emerged almost immediately. As we collected their luggage, Emma's phone rang. She answered, her expression shifting from casual to concerned. "It's Dad," she explained, handing me the phone. "He wants to talk to you." Daniel's voice sounded strained. "Mom, there's been a change of plans. I need the kids back by July 15th instead of the 22nd. That cuts their visit in half," I protested, trying to keep disappointment from my voice while the children watched curiously. "I know. I'm sorry. There's a situation with Amanda's mother. She fell and broke her hip, and Amanda needs to go to Boston to help. I'll be working, so the kids need to be with me in the evenings." The explanation was reasonable, but something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. "I understand," I said, not wanting to question him in front of Emma and Liam. "We'll make the most of the time we have." After ending the call, I explained the situation to the children. Liam's disappointment was immediate and vocal. "But that means we'll miss the baseball game you got tickets for." Emma's reaction was more measured, her gaze analytical. "Is Grandma Julie really hurt, or is this about money again?" The directness of her question startled me. "What do you mean, honey?" "Dad and Mom keep fighting about money. That's why we couldn't go to camp this summer. Dad said we had to economize because of changed circumstances." Her use of air quotes around her father's phrases would have been amusing in different circumstances. "Sometimes adults have to adjust their spending," I said carefully. "It doesn't mean anything is wrong." Emma rolled her eyes with teenage skepticism. "Something's definitely wrong. Dad's working all the time, Mom's constantly on edge, and they stop talking whenever Liam or I come into the room." This glimpse into the household dynamics I had left behind concerned me. The financial adjustments were clearly creating tension, beyond what Daniel had acknowledged in our limited communications. His shortened timeline for the children's visit might indeed be related to Amanda's mother, but I suspected it also reflected a desire to limit the airline expenses of changing their return tickets. As we drove home from the airport, I contemplated this new complication. My decision to withdraw financial support was having the intended effect of forcing Daniel to confront financial reality. But at what cost to the family's stability and the children's sense of security? The shortened visit with Emma and Liam acquired a bittersweet intensity, each day feeling more precious knowing our time together was limited. I abandoned my carefully planned schedule of moderate activities, instead allowing the children to guide our adventures. Emma wanted to explore Scottsdale's Arts District and shop at the boutiques along Fifth Avenue. Liam was content spending hours in the pool, occasionally venturing out for ice cream or to the nearby park where local kids gathered for pickup basketball games. On our 4th evening, as we sat on the patio watching the sunset paint the desert sky in spectacular oranges and purples, Emma broached the subject that had clearly been on her mind. Grandma, did you and Dad have a fight? Is that why you moved away? Liam looked up from the model airplane he was assembling, equally interested in my answer. I chose my words carefully. Not exactly a fight, more of a realization that things needed to change between us. Because he called you a burden? Liam asked bluntly. The directness of his question took me aback. You heard that? Liam nodded solemnly. At your birthday dinner, I was coming downstairs for water and heard him say it. Mom got really mad at him later. This small revelation, that Amanda had objected to Daniel's characterization, surprised me. I had assigned her equal blame in my mind for the growing distance between us. Your father was frustrated, I explained, not wanting to deepen any rift between the children and their parents. Sometimes adults say things they don't fully mean when they're stressed. But that's why you left, isn't it? Emma persisted. Because he made you feel unwelcome. Partly, I acknowledged, but also because I needed to make a change for myself. To create a life where I felt valued and independent. Emma considered this, twirling a strand of pink-tipped hair around her finger. Dad's different since you left. More serious. And he and Mom fight about money all the time. Things are tight right now, I said. They're adjusting to some financial changes. Because you're not helping them anymore? Emma asked with startling perception. I stared at her, speechless for a moment. What makes you say that? I overheard Dad on the phone with someone named Michael. He said something about adjusting to the new financial reality now that Mom's support is gone. I thought he meant child support at first, but that didn't make sense. The perceptiveness of teenagers never ceased to amaze me. Emma had pieced together fragments of adult conversations and formed a remarkably accurate picture of the situation. Your dad and I had a complicated financial relationship for many years, I said carefully. Now that I've moved away, some of those arrangements have changed. So you were giving them money, Liam concluded, his young face serious. And now you're not. It's more complicated than that, I hedged. Why? Emma challenged. Either you were helping them and stopped, or you weren't. Their directness forced a level of honesty I hadn't planned on sharing with them. Yes, I helped your family financially for many years. Your father didn't always know the extent of that help. When I moved away, those arrangements changed. Is that why we couldn't go to camp this summer? Liam asked. Probably partly, I admitted. But everyone's adjusting. Your parents will figure things out. Emma was quiet for a moment, then met my eyes with a maturity beyond her 15 years. I think I understand. Dad took you for granted, and now he has to deal with reality. The simplicity and accuracy of her assessment was startling. Something like that, I acknowledged. Good, she said firmly. He shouldn't have called you a burden when you were actually helping all along. That night, after the children were asleep in the casita, I sat on my patio contemplating our conversation. I had never intended for Emma and Liam to know about the financial dynamics between their father and me. Yet their awareness added an unexpected dimension to the situation. Their perspective was unclouded by adult pride or pretense. They simply saw the fundamental unfairness of their father's treatment of me in light of my long-standing support. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of my phone ringing. Daniel's number appeared on the screen. Mom, he said without preamble. I need to talk to you about the kids. The strained tone of his voice immediately concerned me. Is everything all right? Not really, he admitted. Amanda's mother's situation is more complicated than we thought. Amanda needs to stay in Boston longer, possibly a month or more. I'm drowning trying to manage work and the kids alone. I was wondering. The request he couldn't quite bring himself to make hung in the air between us. You want Emma and Liam to stay with me longer? I suggested. Just until school starts, he said quickly. 6 weeks instead of 1. I know it's a lot to ask. In that moment, I felt the first real shift in our relationship. Daniel was asking for help, directly, honestly, acknowledging his need rather than disguising it as a favor to me. "Of course they can stay," I said. "I'd love to have them here." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done otherwise." It wasn't quite an apology, nor a full recognition of our new reality, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement of mutual need and support that felt more honest than anything in our relationship for years. The extended visit with Emma and Liam transformed my new life in Arizona in ways I hadn't anticipated. What had begun as a quiet, measured existence built around my own needs and preferences evolved into a bustling household centered on teenage drama and preteen energy. The casita became a semi-autonomous zone where Emma practiced makeup tutorials, and Liam built increasingly complex model airplanes. My quiet mornings reading the newspaper with coffee extended to include making breakfast for hungry grandchildren and coordinating the day's activities. I expected to feel overwhelmed, perhaps even resentful of this interruption to my carefully constructed independence. Instead, I discovered a surprising contentment in this new arrangement, one where my contributions were visible and acknowledged, where "thank you" was part of the daily vocabulary, where my presence was clearly valued rather than merely tolerated. The children flourished in the freedom of an Arizona summer. Emma, initially skeptical about spending 6 weeks in the middle of nowhere, discovered a teen arts program at the community center and developed a friendship with Sophia, the granddaughter of my neighbor Marjorie. Liam joined a local summer baseball league where his Chicago training made him a standout player. Both developed golden tans despite my vigilant application of sunscreen, and both seemed to shed some of the tension they had carried from their parents' household. Daniel called every other evening to speak with the children. Our interactions during these calls remained cordial but brief. Logistical discussions about the children's needs, updates on Amanda's mother's recovery, occasional awkward pauses that neither of us quite knew how to fill. He had arranged to have their school clothes and supplies shipped directly to my house, tacit acknowledgement that they would be starting the academic year from Arizona and flying home just days before classes began. 3 weeks into their extended stay, I received an unexpected email from Daniel with the subject line "Financial Update." I opened it with some trepidation, unsure what to expect. "Mom," he wrote, "I wanted to update you on our financial situation since our last conversation. Working with the advisor has been eye-opening. We've made significant changes, downsized our vacation plans, adjusted our monthly budget, refinanced the mortgage at current rates without your supplement. Amanda has decided to return to work part-time once her mother's situation stabilizes. These aren't easy changes, but they're necessary and, frankly, overdue. I should have been more conscious of our actual financial picture years ago, rather than accepting what seemed like fortunate circumstances." The email continued with specific details about their adjusted lifestyle, the country club membership they had relinquished, the decision to keep their current vehicles rather than upgrading as planned, Amanda's resignation from 2 charity boards that required substantial voluntary contributions. No complaints, just a matter-of-fact accounting of their new reality. The final paragraph struck me most deeply. "I've been thinking about our conversation at the cafe. While I still wish you had been more transparent about your support over the years, I understand you were doing what you thought best for our family. The children speak highly of their time with you, and it's clear they're thriving in your care. Thank you for stepping in during this difficult period. I'm beginning to understand that family support works best when it's acknowledged and appreciated, rather than hidden or taken for granted." It wasn't quite an apology, but it represented significant growth. I wrote back immediately, expressing my pride in his proactive approach to their financial challenges and sharing a few observations about how Emma and Liam were flourishing in Arizona. 2 days later, he called outside of his usual schedule. The children were at the community pool with Catherine, So I answered, curious about this deviation from routine. "Mom," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I've been doing a lot of thinking about everything. The financial support, the way we treated you in our home, the burden comment that Liam apparently overheard." He paused, and I heard him take a deep breath. "I owe you an apology. A real one. Not just an acknowledgement buried in an email about finances." I sat down, on the patio chair, unprepared for this moment despite having hoped for it. "The truth is," Daniel continued, "I built my sense of success, my whole self-image, on the belief that I had achieved everything through my own efforts. Finding out how much support you provided behind the scenes was devastating to that self-perception. I reacted from a place of wounded pride rather than gratitude." "I understand that," I said softly. "It wasn't my intention to undermine your confidence or achievement." "I know that now," he replied, "and I'm beginning to understand that accepting help, acknowledging interdependence isn't weakness. It's actually part of being a functional adult and family member." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, the longest, most honest discussion we had shared in years. We talked about Robert and the financial struggles after his death, about Daniel's early career and my decision to support him silently, about the gradual erosion of respect in our relationship. There were difficult moments, instances where old defenses threatened to emerge, but we pushed through with a shared commitment to understanding. As we said goodbye, Daniel added one final thought. "The kids keep talking about Thanksgiving in Arizona. Would that be something you'd consider? All of us coming to you this year?" The invitation represented more than a holiday arrangement. It was an acknowledgement of my new home, my independent life, and a willingness to redefine our family dynamics with me at the center rather than the periphery. "I'd like that very much," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion rising in my throat. "Very much indeed." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.